It's not how you start in fantasy football, it's how you finish. And these players are ready to finish strong. I got more than 10 players that are skyrocketing right now and are ready to explode in fantasy football and potentially help you take home a championship. Now, real quick before I jump into this list, let me just say if you're enjoying this video or any of the videos we drop for you on a weekly basis and you haven't taken 1 second to subscribe, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, like this video, we'd greatly appreciate it. Let's start at running back, and so much for Bucky Irving being limited in his return. Now, granted, he did only play 54% of the snaps, but he had 19 total touches in this game, and he was 12th among all running backs in expected fantasy points in Week 13. And he gets a fantastic schedule the rest of the way here. They finish with the Saints, the Panthers, the Falcons, and the Dolphins. Now, sure, the Dolphins have been better against the run. We've been saying for weeks now, while everybody else is like, it's the Dolphins, start your running backs. We've been saying, hey, they're actually pretty good against running backs. But are you really going to be scared to start Bucky Irving against the Dolphins? No, you're not. And you got to think he's only going to get more and more usage. The shoulder looked fine. He looked great. I mean, he looked fantastic. The shoulder wasn't an issue. You got to think this guy is just going to step back into his workhorse role, probably starting here in Week 14. Wheels up if you've got Bucky Irving, looking like pretty much a must start from now till the end of the season. And now I can't say I loved RJ Harvey's usage in Week 13. I mean, it wasn't terrible. He did get 56% of the rushing attempts, but what I really didn't like was 22% of the routes. Why? This is what this guy does. I mean, even when J.K. Dobbins was healthy, he was running a higher percentage of the routes than this. Why all of a sudden, like, are we cutting back on this guy's routes? This is what he excels at. But what was actually very, very encouraging here, apart from the fact that he was clearly the lead back, he got all the inside the 5 carries. That's what I was a little bit nervous about, after what was a Week 11 going into the team's bye, when we saw Jaleel McLaughlin get some inside the 5 work. It's like, do they trust this guy inside the 5? Well, they trusted him inside the 5 in Week 13, no doubt about it here. If he's going to get that kind of usage, like touchdown upside, plus get most of the work, and let's hope he starts running more routes, because again, this is what he's good at. Why is this guy not running more routes? Then he's got tremendous upside. Now, I will say, if there is a drawback here, does not have the best rest of the season schedule. In the fantasy playoffs, gets the Packers, the Jags, and the Chiefs. Those are 3 really tough run defenses. But that said, if he's getting all or most of the run in this Broncos offense, he's got touchdown upside. He's got to at least be a high-end RB2 the rest of the way. And are we seeing the pendulum swing in Carolina? I mean, sure, technically Rico did have 1 more touch than Chuba Hubbard in this Week 13 game, but the fact that he only had 1 more touch right there is a massive difference. And it sure felt like, watching the game, that Chuba was out there way more than Rico Dowdle. And apparently that was the case, because he played almost 60% of the snaps. Despite this being a game, the Panthers, were winning or, close throughout the whole game. It wasn't like the Rams were steamrolling them or anything. And I've always felt like Dave Canales kind of preferred Chuba Hubbard, and he just kind of was forced to go to Rico Dowdle because Rico Dowdle had been playing so well and Chuba was struggling. But we've seen a shift over the last 4 games. I talked about it in the panic video. Chuba has actually been better than Rico Dowdle, so maybe this is a chance. Maybe he just needed to get healthy. It's going to be interesting to see here, because of course they're going into the bye in Week 14. And then they come out of the bye, they play the Saints. Going to be very interesting to see how this backfield split shakes out. Now, one thing we do know about the Panthers is they want to run the football, so there probably is enough for both these guys. Now, I will say, after that Saints matchup, you can't feel great here, because they get the Bucs and then the Seahawks, although both those games are in Carolina, and Carolina does tend to play better at home than on the road, like a lot of teams, so maybe there's still a chance here. But we know whoever the lead back is in this offense has value, and honestly, both of these guys might have value going forward, but starting to look like Chuba might retake over this backfield in the fantasy playoffs. It's hard to say any run game has been more dominant than the Bears' run game as of late, and wow, we saw this backfield just absolutely dominate the Lions in Week 13. Now, it is worth noting that despite the fact that Kyle Monangai, is trending up and had a big game here, Swift did technically play more of the snaps, and despite the fact that Monangai did score the touchdown, and he's been scoring the touchdowns, Swift did still get more inside the 5 carries here. But of course, Swift is not a guy I really need to talk about. I want to talk about Kyle Monangai, because despite the fact that Swift played more snaps, Monangai did lead the team with 22 carries here. And the way this rushing offense is looking right now, again, kind of like Rico and Chuba, you can start both these guys, but Monangai is the one that is trending up right now in this backfield. Swift, I don't want to say trending down, maybe just kind of flatlining in this backfield, but Monangai certainly trending up. Now, again, a little bit of word of caution here because there's only 4 games left in the fantasy season. We got to really pay attention to the schedule, and it is not great for the Bears, who get the Packers twice and the Browns in the next 3 games. Those are 3 brutal spots, but I mean, after what they did to the Lions, maybe it doesn't really matter. And then they do get the 49ers in week 17. That should not scare you whatsoever here. So look, again, the way this running game is rolling, even in those tough matchups, you're probably still taking a chance on these guys anyways. And the last running back to talk about, Devin Neal of the New Orleans Saints, kind of played out pretty much how we expected. He was the guy here. He got the bulk of the touches, had a okay game. I mean, if you started them, you weren't like mad about it, but you also weren't excited about it, but that was kind of what we expected. But I saw what I wanted to see from this guy. He pretty much dominated the backfield here, and what I really loved here, almost a 70% route participation, because that is what this guy excels at. This is what I loved about his prospect profile. No, he wasn't one of my favorite running backs in this class, but what I saw was a good pass catching back who could be that change of pace back, but also be decent in an every down role. And that's what he's got here in New Orleans now. And I will say the Saints actually have a tremendous rest of season schedule. Bucks, Panthers, Jets, and Titans to finish the season. That being said, what's really the upside in this Saints offense for any running back, honestly? But still, Devin Neal's going to get the bulk of the carries. And if he's going to catch passes, again, that's really where he's going to make his living, catching passes. He's going to at least be a solid RB2 rest of the way, again, assuming Alvin Kamara is out. All right, let's move on to wide receiver, and welcome back, Terry McLaurin. So much for the Surtain shadow. He just said, screw you, Surtain. I am going to go off this week. In fact, he led all wide receivers in expected fantasy points, finished the game with 22.6 fantasy points, again, against the Broncos secondary. And this was despite the fact that he only ran 58% of the routes because, again, they didn't want to just throw him out there and go 0 to 100 and get him injured again. And in the fantasy playoffs, he gets the Giants and the Cowboys. And despite the Cowboys being better on defense, they're still terrible against wide receivers since the bye. I think they're allowing the 2nd most or 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers since the bye week. Yeah, they're better against the run, still terrible against the pass. Now, I will say, in between those 2 matchups, does have a week 16 matchup against the Eagles, but that is at home. And I'm going to talk about JD a little bit later. But look, last year in that matchup against the Eagles in week 16 at home, they put up 36 points in that game. So this is not a complete stay away matchup for Terry. Not to mention, he just torched the Broncos. He can get it done against the Eagles. Terry McLaurin came out of that game fully healthy. We could be getting JD back really soon. Going to talk about him in a little bit here. Yeah. Giddy up for Terry McLaurin. This guy is ready to skyrocket the rest of the way. And I think it's time to really pay attention to Adonai Mitchell of the New York Jets. Since being traded from the Colts to the Jets, he's actually been 8th among all pass catchers in expected fantasy points. He also has an insane 41.8 first read percentage and 3 end zone targets in 3 games. Now, prior to last week, for week 13, it hadn't amounted to much because he couldn't catch the football. But guess what happened in week 13? He caught them. He caught almost all of them. This is what we wanted to see. The usage has been there. We just need to see him finishing the plays. It's not like this guy isn't talented. It's just kind of like mental issues, like lapses in concentration. If he can fix that, he absolutely can be, I don't want to say like a league winner or a smash down the stretch or anything, but he can at least be like a high upside weekly flex. And I got to think, even if when Garrett Wilson returns this year, which it does sound like he's going to be back, they're not just going to completely go away from Adonai Mitchell here. He's probably going to slot in as a wide receiver too. And Tyrod Taylor has at least made this offense serviceable for fantasy football. And another guy who might have just needed a change of scenery this year was Devon Vele. Remember, he was traded from the Broncos to the Saints to fill the Rashid Shaheed role, and he's been filling it pretty well, especially here in week 13. Led the team with 23 fantasy points and 14 expected fantasy points. Tied tight end Juwan Johnson for the team lead in target share, and was tied with Chris Olave for 2nd in first read percentage. And as I already said, the Saints have a fantastic schedule here. The Bucks, the Panthers, the Jets, the Titans, those are all terrible defenses against wide receivers. He's in that Rashid Shaheed slot role in this offense, but unlike Shaheed, He's a big slot wide receiver. Now, again, like I said with Devin Neal, you can't get super excited about anybody in the Saints offense. But again, this guy can be an every week flex with upside for your fantasy teams. And with the schedule the Saints have, you probably don't even need to really think about it. You can just lock him into your lineup every single week. Then I got to talk about Alec Pierce again. Talked about him a few weeks ago, but it's time to talk about him again because this is now 3 of the last 4 games where he has out-targeted Michael Pittman. Even in this tough matchup against Houston, came through with a nice game. Got one of the only 2 end zone targets, him and Tyler Warren here. It's kind of feeling like Alec Pierce is becoming the wide receiver 1 in this offense, and Michael Pittman is starting to take a step back after Pittman looked like potentially a league winner earlier this season. Now, I will say they have a pretty tough schedule here. They get the Jags twice and the Seahawks with one easy game against the 49ers, but he just proved he could get it done against the Texans defense. Why can't he get it done against the Jags or the Seahawks? He's always got that big play upside. He's always got a chance to score. And he's not just being used as a run deep, throw it up there, hope he catches it kind of guy. They're using him in more productive ways here, almost as a true wide receiver 1. So, look, Pittman, I'm not out on Pittman. I'm not saying he's going to be a bust rest of the way, but I think Pierce is the guy I want in this Indy offense. All right, then one more Saint. That is tight end Juwan Johnson, tied for the team lead in targets in Week 13, led the team in first read percentage. He now has 5 or more catches in 4 of the last 6 games. He's been heavily involved in this offense, and as I said, a fantastic schedule for the Saints. Don't need to break it down again. I've already mentioned it twice here. You got to feel good about really all the Saints as far as schedule goes. Now, again, I'll just keep saying it's the Saints offense. Like, Juwan Johnson isn't going to put up a top 5, top 3, fantasy finish at the tight end position, but he's one of these tight ends you can just put him in your lineup, lock him into your tight end slot, and not even think about the position because he's at least going to give you a solid floor every week. And it's not like he can't score touchdowns. He does have some upside here. And with the schedule the Saints have, you should have no worries playing this guy every single week from now to the end of the season. All right, and then I did briefly say I'm going to talk about Jayden Daniels. It's time to talk about Jayden Daniels. Look, Jayden Daniels might still be out there on some waiver wires. People drop this guy because, look, we thought at the injury, when you saw the injury, it's like, yeah, his season's over. But no, it's not. And in fact, he might even come back this week. And if he doesn't, he's almost certainly coming back Week 15. And whether the Commanders are winning or losing, he's already said, if he's healthy, he's playing. Kind of like Joe Burrow. He's going to play. And I've already said, fantastic schedule. The Giants and the Cowboys. He can just absolutely smash those teams. And then again, in Week 16, does get the Eagles, but it is at home, just like last year. And what did he do last year in Week 16 at home against the Eagles? 5 touchdowns and 81 rushing yards. This is Jayden Daniels we are talking about. Like, there aren't a lot of better options than Jayden Daniels in fantasy, and he could be potentially be coming back right in time to save your team, assuming it's not dead, of course, in the fantasy playoffs. And if he's out there on the waiver wire, you have to go get Jayden Daniels. I mean, even if you have Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts, I'd probably still go get Jayden Daniels at this point. And then one more QB, because I know Jayden Daniels, he's still rostered in most fantasy leagues. And if you don't have Jayden Daniels, you might not be able to get Jayden Daniels. But I'll bet there's a good chance you can get Trevor Lawrence. He's now thrown for at least 229 yards in each of the last 2 games, has 5 touchdowns over the last 2 games, and he's ran for 25 and 29 yards in each of the last 2 games. And believe it or not, over that span, Trevor Lawrence is a QB4 in fantasy, and the Jags get a great rest of season schedule. They get the Colts twice, who are not, necessarily a bad matchup for quarterbacks because they're probably going to have to be throwing the ball a lot in those games. Then he gets that Jets defense. They do have to face the Broncos in Week 16, so that might be the one matchup where you go stream a quarterback. But still, you can go pick up Trevor Lawrence right now, probably on your waiver wire, and just set him in as your QB1 and be totally fine with it. But what you definitely can do and be more than fine with is make sure you watch all the amazing content we've got for you here in Week 14 to help you get into the fantasy playoffs if you're fighting for that playoff spot, or maybe to get you the number 1, number 2 seed, get you that bye. Everything you need to dominate this week, you're going to be able to find it in our Week 14 playlist right here.